Hey everyone, welcome to Plants and Politics. So I came across this story and it just pissed me off. So while tens of millions of Americans have been struggling to feed their children, keep a roof over their head, they've found themselves without health insurance in the middle of a deadly global pandemic, a man named Steven Schwartzman received over $610 million last year alone, just in 2020, in the form of dividends and compensation. So who is Schwartzman? He is the chief executive of a private equity firm known as Blackstone Group. They're pretty famous. And guess what? That 610 million was an increase over what he received in 2019. So in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, during the greatest economic downturn since the Great Depression, this guy's income increased. He made more money than the previous year. Now, of course, Schwartzman isn't the only one. I don't mean to just pick on him, although I don't really give a damn if his feelings are hurt. I've shared with you before how billionaires throughout the world increased their net worth as average citizens saw their entire lives and livelihood destroyed last year. And the reason I'm bringing this up and the reason this story just really hit a nerve is, number one, because I'm watching what's going on right now with Biden and with the corporate Democrats and Republicans denying average Americans a living wage, pretending that they can't do anything about it, pretending that they can't just fire the parliamentarian as Donald Trump did and do whatever the hell they want to help Americans. They don't really give a shit when they say that they're wanting to fight for the average American and for the working class. Because if they wanted to do it, they could do it. Period. Full stop. And you know what? You take the excuse of the parliamentarian out of it. What do you think Kirsten Sinema and Joe Manchin are going to do? You think they want to be in the hot seat? You think they want to have the entire country looking at them as the reason why we didn't lift over 1 million people out of poverty? Hell no. They would go along with it in a heartbeat. But here's the deal, and here's really why I wanted to talk about this story. Schwartzman is a perfect example of why and how the stock market is completely and utterly detached from the reality of the economy for the vast majority of Americans. He's also a perfect example of how a small minority in this country have become billionaires not in spite of the suffering of the majority, but because of the suffering of the majority. And I'm going to give you facts to back this up. I'll explain exactly what I mean by that in a minute. But this is why we can't continue to allow politicians to use the stock market to point to it as a barometer for the health of our economy and as a means to pretend that their policies are working and, oh, look, it's good for the country because look at how great the stock market is doing. Not only does the stock market not reflect the fact that millions of Americans are living in poverty, it's also a piss poor measure and reflection of what those dollars cost Americans. So here's what I mean by that and by the fact that people like Schwartzman are becoming wealthy because of your suffering, because of the suffering of average Americans. Their wealth depends on your suffering. When stock prices are up for oil, do pundits also talk about how air pollution is also likely up at the same time because the transportation sector continues to use fossil fuels and refuses to look for alternatives? Who does that affect? It affects all of us. When shares for commodities are higher than ever, or farming products, do they explain that emissions from factory farms are also higher than ever and how the resulting climate change will cost all of us as taxpayers down the road? Because we are going to be taxed to send more money in the form of FEMA and National Guard aid to these hard-hit areas of the country along the coast, and that state and local governments are going to have to then pay to repair roads and other infrastructure as a result of that climate change that is a result of their factory farming? Do they share the fact that more sentient animals are likely to be dismembered and scalded while still alive and fully conscious because they had to speed up the slaughter lines at the factory farms so they could try to squeeze every penny out of the minimum wage that they're paying their traumatized workers? And here's how that affects you. As a result, not only do the animals suffer needlessly and die a horrible death, but you are more likely to eat meat that is contaminated with feces and nails and feathers and tumors that weren't properly discarded or washed off prior to their processing. Are they honest about the toxic runoff or air pollution from these factories and factory farms and how that disproportionately affects communities of color and the poor communities throughout our country, and how people who live nearest to these areas, to these factories and factory farms, have a much higher rate of heart disease and asthma and cancer and other life-altering and life-threatening diseases and illness? Do they then explain the undue burden that that places on our healthcare system and how that increases the costs for you and I, for everyone? And why? Because these corporations choose to use the least expensive methods for dealing with their pollution and runoff so that they can pay out massive dividends to people like Steven Schwartzman at the end of the year. Not so they can boost the average wage of their workers, no, so they can line the pockets of people like Schwartzman. Do they explain that if we had a $15 federal minimum wage in this country and millions of Americans were lifted out of poverty, that these companies then wouldn't have millions of dollars lying around that they use to buy back their own stocks and artificially inflate the value of their stock? Rather than giving average Americans a living wage, rather than allowing parents to decide, hey, maybe one of us can work and the other can stay home and be there for our children. But yet they talk such a great game, especially Republicans, about being the party of family values. But they'll tout that ever-increasing new historical high watermark for the Dow. But they never explain the long-term costs of that historical high. They never explain the immeasurable pain and suffering and the true cost for those high stock prices. It's time that we start considering the fact that there is a cost for the wealth of people like Schwartzman and Jeff Bezos and the Mercer family or the Koch brothers. They're not just getting wealthy while everyone else in America struggles and suffers. That's what so many of these politicians would like for you to believe. And that's what they sell their conservative viewers on, that we don't need a wealth tax, because everyone has the ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. That's bullshit. It's absolute, complete, and utter bullshit. They're getting wealthy because everyone else in America is struggling and suffering. Could they become billionaires without average Americans struggling and suffering and becoming sick and having to purchase their overpriced prescription drugs? No, I don't think so. It's very doubtful. If they were forced to abide by regulations that truly protect our land, our water, and our air, to prevent the pollution and the contamination of our waterways and our land, they couldn't hand over $610 million to someone like Steven Schwartzman. But that's more important to them. Giving that guy $610 million last year was more important than your child having clean air. And it was a hell of a lot more important than average Americans, hardworking, everyday, blue-collar Americans, being able to go to work 40 hours a week, put food on the table, and keep a roof over their family's head, and have their dignity, and not have to work every minute of their life. But my real question is, when are the American people going to say enough is enough? When are the American people going to recognize that the real reason that candidates like Bernie Sanders are shot down and railed against and talked about as if they're the devil incarnate across the media, not just in right-wing media, on MSNBC, on CNN, when are they going to realize that the reason is because candidates like Bernie Sanders would put an end to this? When are the American people going to realize that people like Tom Vilsack, Biden's choice to head the USDA, means that things will not change? He's another corporate shill who allowed Big Ag to get away with murder under the Obama administration. He's just another one of these lifelong revolving door participants who moves back and forth between industry and the government. And then he looks the other way when his buddies from his old company want to poison Americans with things like GMOs. Vilsack was one of those people out there pushing GMOs as if they were the greatest thing ever, which we now know is tied to just about, if not every, disease known to man. So Vilsack and all these other people, they have way too many ties to big business to ever do what's really necessary and what the American people really want, which is a true draining of the swamp. So until everyone understands and acknowledges that these people become billionaires at the expense of all of our health, our happiness, our economic freedoms, nothing will change. And until my liberal friends, I'm going to call you guys out, until you guys start to understand that the media plays a role in this. Yes, Fox and Newsmax, yes, they're horrid. They just lie flat out. But the likes of CNN and MSNBC and all the other ones, they're also not great. They're complicit in helping to gin up fear around candidates like Bernie Sanders, while convincing you that someone like Biden is the only one who can win. They manufacture consent for the candidate who, as Biden himself put it, nothing will fundamentally change. So if you truly care about racial equality, if you truly care about economic equality and children not going to bed hungry at night, if you truly care about the mental and physical health of your fellow Americans, then I'm begging you to stop falling for the false narrative that a truly progressive populist candidate can't win, and start putting pressure on people like Kamala Harris, who right now alone has the ability, has the power to overturn this ridiculous ruling from the parliamentarian, because it's just an opinion. It's not a law. It's not a statute. They could still push for the $15 minimum wage, but it's because of shit like this that they're not doing it. And if Biden keeps going down this road of shooting down and pretending that he can't take bold action to help average Americans, we are going to end up with another Trump type of person as president. Hands down, I will bet you money. And the next Trumpian type of president might not be inept and ignorant and lazy as Trump was. And then God help us all. So people, understand, no, it's not, oh, we're out to get these millionaires and billionaires and they're all evil people. But they couldn't hold the wealth that they do without your suffering. Just a thought, guys, but it really got me going today with everything going on, and Biden's just pissing me off on a lot of things. So as always, thanks so much for watching and listening. Take care, and I'll talk with you soon.